Welcome to the Empowered to Connect podcast, where we come together to discuss a healing-centered approach to engagement and well-being for ourselves, our families, and our communities. I'm JD Wilson, and I am your host. And today on the show, we've got three guests who are all academic professionals. They are working in the school environment, doing everything from social work to counseling to alumni support, and they've been in various roles in schools over the last several years. As we get set in America to go back to school in some form or fashion, there have been multiple schools, including my own kids' school, who've already been back in school virtually and rolling that way for 2 weeks or so. Around the world, some schools have reopened in person and virtual. This is a conversation that really is relevant for anybody listening, no matter where you're at, because one of the things that we are going to talk about is the recent surge in looking at trauma-informed, healing-centered engagement style care for children in schools across academics. And so, is this working? What is the need for this? Why were the traditional methods of caring for kids and disciplining and redirecting, why were those not working? And then we'll just look at going forward. What are ways as a parent that you can advocate for your kids and for your teachers in schools? What are ways as teachers? What are some practical methods you can put into place to help during a pandemic make sure that your kids are feeling secure and safe? What are the benefits of having an attachment-centered mindset for a classroom? We dive into all of that stuff. And the three ladies on the show today, Becca Tarleton, Jackie Rowe Fields, and Jocelyn Lee, are all good friends, which you'll hear that. But they all have worked in multiple different school environments around the country. And so it'll be really fascinating to be able to hear that perspective from them. You'll want to stick around and make sure you make it to the end because at the end, they just talk about ways for you as a parent to advocate for your kids in the school, ways for you as an educator to advocate for your kids, both in the school and building bridges with parents. It's a really, really helpful, practical, interesting episode about what it looks like when we are attachment-centered and healing-centered in our approach to caring for kids in schools. So I don't think you'll want to miss it. It's a great conversation with Well, all right, we're here with our guest today with Jocelyn Lee, with Jackie Rowe Fields, and with Becca Tarleton. And before we get into our topic today, talking about schools and about the work of being an educator and the need for parents themselves to understand education a little bit better. Let me just introduce each of them individually. Obviously, you've met Jackie before if you've been listening to the podcast, and so you should go back and listen to her episode as well. And for those of you who have not met Becca Tarleton yet, Becca, will you just kind of give us a brief introduction of who you are and where you're from and all that?
Sure. My name is Becca, and I grew up in Moscow, Russia, where my parents were missionaries, and then moved back to Tennessee for college. Ended up doing a urban ministry internship for 1 year in Memphis, met J.D. Wilson, worked with him at a school, and never left. So since that internship, I have done I got a master's in social work, and I did some more work in the schools for a little bit before I transitioned to the Memphis Family Connection Center, which those of you who are familiar with Empowered to Connect may have heard of. And so I worked with them for the first 2 years of the organization. So I helped kind of in the very beginning, dreaming and getting stuff out there, a couple of years. And at MFCC, we were partnering with a lot of schools in Memphis to talk about how the principles could be used in the classrooms. And through that and a couple of other connections, I ended up being hired as a school counselor at a local elementary school. So this is my third school year, definitely my most interesting school year to date. I have grown into, our school calls it the Attachment Village Office. Other schools might call it behavioral support or discipline, socio-emotional support. And so in that office is myself and 2 associate deans, and we just help students with all kinds of different challenges and strengths and needs. And yeah, we work together to try to support families. And so that's me. I love ETC, love what it brings to families and educators, and have benefited from that a lot in my own work.
Awesome. What those of you will not hear Becca say, because she's just not going to say this, is that if you have gone through any content from ETC in the last little bit, or if you are prepping in the future to go through ETC parent training or any of the new courses that will be offered in the near future, you will be experiencing Becca's genius in her writing and helping reform the content and edit it and get it out. She is brilliant in that facet, so we're really glad to have her today. Jocelyn Lee, will you introduce yourself and let us know where you're from and what you do?
Yeah, I'm Jocelyn Lee, and I am currently a licensed master social worker and a licensed school social worker here in Memphis. This is my 5th school year as a school social worker. My husband and I moved to Memphis in 2015 and jumped right in and worked at a school where I actually got a chance to work with Jackie and Becca. So that's how we know each other. Prior to that, I came from Savannah, Georgia. I had worked there for 3-ish years in mediation, actually, and did civil and juvenile court mediation. Prior to that, did a stint in youth ministry for a year, and I don't know, go all the way back and born in the States, lived overseas for a long time, came back to the States, went to college here in America and grad school, and started learning about like what was good for kids probably when I moved to Memphis and started working full-time with kids, and then got introduced to ETC as really a certification, continuing education opportunity for my license. And then from there, really kind of felt like I met and became part of a group of people that believe the same thing as I did. I just didn't know that. So ETC has at least helped me see that, what I've been feeling and what I've been thinking is good for kids is actually a thing. And so that was good to find out. And so since then have just been pushing myself to keep learning and pushing others to learn with me. So that's it.
And so that Jocelyn is not lying, you can't see this in the podcast, but in her office behind her is a feelings chart, which is a very ETC element there. So, Jackie, you obviously were on one of our earlier episodes, and we talked a lot on that episode about your history and education. But if you don't mind, will you just kind of explain your role, maybe your last role and then your current role in schools, and kind of how you operate in schools right now?
So, JD, that sounds boring. I don't want to talk about that. I would much rather piggyback on what Jocelyn said about having an intuition about what was going on with children, what was happening in schools and with families. And it was almost like a confirmation bias, if we could use psychological terms about it. Like there's something we knew we should be doing and we were trying, and then we had to find like-minded people, research, resources out there to give us the language. And I tell my friends, really, I'm online with right now, this is my family, okay? These are my peeps.
Right.
These are my peeps, because we had to find each other. We were talking about treating kids in a way that really was not acceptable when we started using this language years ago. And we took a lot of heat for it. We took a lot. Some of us were ran out of schools for it, as a matter of fact.
Oh, yeah.
And so to me, what's so interesting is now it's just everywhere. The language is everywhere. People are clamoring, to know more. And even though they say they want to know more, they don't really want to know more. They want to put a check in the box.
Right.
they've done that training, but when it comes down to implementing the practices in classrooms, in school buildings, and at home, there's a disconnect.
Yeah, and I think what I found is that people want the results, right? And so sometimes it's even a well-meaning disconnect of like, okay, well, I'm going to use the right language, but like, obviously when a kid's out of line, like they've got to be brought back in line, It is a life-altering way of operating. Like, and so that goes in schools as well. And I was, Jackie, you and Becca and I were working together in a school when we first went through, and when Elizabeth and I first went through the ETC parent training course years ago, and were introduced to all of these principles. And I mean, it's similar to what everybody has said in this conversation. There were just a bunch of aha moments of like, I knew there was something to this, right? Like I knew that it's not just goofy old JD's great with kids, like, and I just had some natural knack for something. There was something in the way that, now, at my core, personally, I would say like operating in a manner trying to imitate the way that I believe Jesus would interact with children. Like I think that had part of my heart geared that way. But then for me, the biggest thing is early on in studying Dr. Purvis's work, and then in reading whether it's Dan Siegel or anyone afterward, it was seeing, oh, well, like there's just scientific research backing all of this stuff up. And not only does it not back up the ways that we were previously trying to do these things, the research actively disproves the other methods from being the most effective methods out there. And so I think we were all kind of getting to see that together in our own work around the same time. And so the difference that we saw in the kids that we interacted with and the relationships there made a massive, massive difference. And I can think of all of us have, and anyone who works with kids has their, air quote, one kid story, this kind of their first milestone moment they had. And one of the first kids I started doing kind of individual intervention with, if you want to call it that, really was just because this kid's classroom teacher was sick of him and didn't know what to do with them because he was a bull in a china shop. And he was literally the biggest kid in the class and just always laughing and class clown and, very avoidant with everything. But just, was really difficult to rein in. And I remember I would take him, every day around the same time, and we would start to do just work with class and talk. And as we built a relationship, all of a sudden this entire another world opened up. One, he learned quicker, but then two, there were some immediate measures in place of, I started to learn what set him off. I started to learn what his biggest triggers were. And then I could communicate that to teachers and kind of backdoor, create safe environments for him by knowing like, well, he flipped out on this, but here's kind of the backstory of why he flipped out here. So if you can kind of keep that in mind, it'll help you to keep him on track, and he'll be your best leader if you can, help him feel safe and help him feel included in all of it. And so that was all happening for me, and Becca was kind of there to witness it, and Jackie was there to witness it. And so after that, I knew there was something to it. It wasn't just that my kids at home responded well to this, but I'm now seeing one of the kids that everyone else was having a hard time with, these principles worked to create a connection. Becca, I'd like to start there with you if we can. We talked a lot about attachment before we started recording today, and just obviously that is a buzzword that, like Jackie said, is starting to creep in these settings, but it's not always talked about from a place of knowledge. It's usually just regurgitating a line from a book. Can you kind of walk us through why attachment is really at the core of any of these conversations, whether it's parenting or kind of caregiving or teaching, educating, all of that?
Absolutely. First, I have to piggyback on your story about that student, because I remember you working with him every day in the office. And one of the things that I remember is on my second day as an intern was one of the times when he came down to meet with you, and you immediately, when he walked in, he walked past me and you were like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Hey, this is Miss Becca. Can you say hi, Miss Becca? And you walked him through that interaction with me. And so from the jump, you were using your relationship with him to help him build relationships with more people. And I just think that's so beautiful. Yeah. And I don't think that you were doing it because you read that in a book somewhere that said, hey, you should do this. But like the way that you are with kids, every opportunity is a teaching opportunity. And I think that that's something that as you get into this work, if it becomes natural to you, he could have just walked past me. I was an intern. It was my second day. I was probably making copies for the after school clubs, and he could have just walked past me and talked to you, and that would have been fine. But instead, you saw an opportunity for him to make another positive connection. And by the end of the time that I was there, he knew me by name. He would say hi to me without being prompted. And so I just think that that's really beautiful to start there with that story. I had heard of attachment like in a psychology class in college. And they talk about Bowlby and they talk about the strange situation with Mary Ainsworth. And you hear this like weird 80s psychology, which it's not weird 80s psychology, but you hear it and you watch this video in the psychology class and you're like, what is happening? And why are they filming these kids? But as you dig into the research, it just tells you so much about kids and adults and human development. And so I knew that it was important from a psychology class. I never thought it was practical. I thought that's something that you read for a test, and I got that question right on number 16 is A. Yeah. And so that's kind of how I saw it in college. And then I end up, here in Memphis, totally like culture shock, new atmosphere for me. And all of a sudden it becomes more about the relationships, right? So what I felt, what I learned, and what a lot of people assume is that the more that you treat a kid like they're an adult, the more they'll act like an adult. Treat them like they're grown and they'll act grown. Give them a lot of responsibility and they'll rise to the occasion. And that's just what I thought. That's what I learned. That's what I saw. And so there was all of these high expectations. And I am here to say high expectations are great and important and good with so much high support. Right? And that's attachment. So attachment is the high expectations and the high support. You can't have one without the other. And if you look at a textbook on psychology, they'll give you a grid with 4 things in it. And it's high support with high demands. It's high support with no demands. It's no support and no demands. And it's high and high, right? So you want high support and high expectations. And that's kind of the foundation, right? So that's all the psychology or whatever. So I'd heard it, I learned it. I kind of started to get a feel for it. And then I go to this school where the number one book that they have staff read is called Hold On to Your Kids by Gordon Neufeld. And so what he did was help me to see that attachment is not just good because it feels good. Attachment is good because it enables the kid to grow. And so he has a quote that says,
huge.
Yeah. That's how the kid grows. So he has a quote that says, when he, the child, asks for a hug, we give him a warmer one than the one he's giving us. We liberate children not by making them work for our love, but by letting them rest in it. Wow. And he goes on and on. But what he says is it's not a reward that I'm dangling in front of you where I will love you if when. It's that they feel so much love and support that they are enabled to go down that scary slide, jump off that diving board. Like they're able to do the things that scare them. Yeah. So I could go on and on, but I'll stop there for a minute.
Well, I think that isn't, honestly, we could end the podcast right there because that is an enormous principle to tackle. And if you can allow a culture to have that permeate, it does change everything. Jackie, I see your hand raised about this. Would you talk more about that?
Because something that Becca said just resonates with me so much, and I know Jocelyn's going to chime in on this, is in schools, we've gotten away from using child development. Like our practices around how we educate kids. First of all, calling them scholars when they're still students, when they're children. I'm just going to leave that there. Go ahead, Jocelyn. When you pick it up.
I mean, everything that Becca was saying and is continuing to say, and, she and I talk pretty frequently too, just to learn from each other, is so true. And I think the piece too is that we forget sometimes. I think I forget sometimes that like good attachment, good relationships builds trust and safety. And especially for kids that come from hard places, that's like their number one need. And so when we go into places that kind of talk about it, but they don't do it, instead their interpretation of meeting a need, right, is like very specific rules, very specific directions. And that doesn't make me as an adult feel safe.
Right.
Right. If I don't have a relationship with you, what does it matter that you have 10 rules for me in my class? Who are you? What is your name? What do you like to do? Right. So it is also like trying to help teachers and parents too. I'm a parent. I have to learn this, that I'm a human being.
Yeah.
We're human beings. At the end of the day, at some point, sometimes we forget what it means to be a human. And so we expect things out of people, especially little ones, that we don't expect for ourselves and know that it's impossible for us to do sometimes.
Right.
And so there's that too, of like, it's constantly like stepping forward with what we know, but stepping back to realize that like, if that is what's true, then I have to make sure that I'm doing that well.
Well, yes. Amen, Jocelyn. Yeah. Somehow I feel like structure, systems, making sure an environment is free of chaos by implementing rules and regulations. Somehow we've taken that and erased the love factor out of it, the relationship factor, the attachment factor. Because if you think about it, we talk all the time with teachers. Teaching 101 is about building relationship with your children, right? We say that every year. And if you even go further, if you think about young parents, and some of you are young parents, what do they teach us about our children right off the bat? That newborn baby needs to be warm, feel the warmth of their mother, right?
Yeah.
They need to feel that attachment. And so intuitively, we know that attachment is so important. But again, Becca gives us the resource that confirms the bias. If you're bent that way and you have that bias, if you're not, you need to get this book and you need to start leaning in that direction.
Well, and I do think, Jackie, that's why the research is so important. The four of us do naturally have a personality bent where we're going to naturally be more empathetic, more warm-natured communicators with kids. But that's not why it's not important because look how effective we are when we're nice to kids. It's not that. It's the research shows that what we're actually doing and what's actually happening in their brains is a foundation for learning is being poured, and then it's being allowed to set and become hard, and then things can be built on top of that attachment at a faster rate and at a more effective rate than if you were to do that strictly through just trying to go through the machine and put it in there by force, right? And so I think that's super, super important for us to keep on. Becca, practically, when you get to a school where that is the MO, can you talk to us about some of the practical elements that is, like how that looks practically within your school?
So let me say this. Let me say I've worked in two schools, and one leaned more towards the structure and one leaned more towards the nurture in this kind of balancing act. And let me just say both are super, super important. And you can't have one without the other because neither one works. Neither one is the environment for the kid to grow. And so I saw excellent educators, the people on this podcast and more, who were finding the balance. And it's a journey, just like with anything. There's not a perfect place in the world. But everywhere you go, whether you go into a highly structured home or school or a highly nurturing home or school, there's people that are trying to find the balance. And that's just something that you should look for in your, in your own child's school, in your community, in your home. Like, look for that and see where you are. Practically speaking, it's about creating the time and space for it to happen. So high structure, do this in 3 seconds and go, moves more quickly than high nurture. Hi, what's your name? I see you have a Pokemon hat on today. Do you like Pokemon? Takes more time. And so one of the things that you have to be able to do is to build in that time and to see that as an urgent, important task.
Yeah.
If connection is an urgent, important task, then you build the time for it and the space. And so one way that they do that at the school that I'm at now is that I'm in the car line every morning along with my team members. And we're in the car line, not because nobody else can open a car door, or not because, during COVID, nobody else can take a temperature, but because it's important that we build that village. And I do want to shout out the attachment village for all of us for a second, because if you're a parent, you may be thinking, well, how does the teacher fit in? And if you're a teacher, you may be thinking, well, I'm not their parent. I didn't have them in the cradle, like I wasn't rocking them to sleep. The thing that research shows us time and time again is that every child needs one safe adult. But I believe that if a kid has 10 cheerleaders, that's great, right? Yeah. There's no limit to the benefits of having a safe village, people that support you and love you. Some of us naturally have huge families and we support each other. Some of us come from where we're the only child. Some of us come from high support. Some of us had to do a lot on our own. And so as a teacher, as a parent, if you just look for those connections, I think that's really key. And if you are a teacher, just know that the time you spend with a child, whether it be virtual or in person, can be crucial. And I think, back to that same young man, I think, JD, that you made a huge impact on that young man's life. And the work is really hard if you're an educator or a parent. Day by day, it's really hard to see progress. It's really hard to measure growth. So one thing that Miss Jackie always does a good job of reminding me of is to look for those few moments, those few wins, write them down, remind yourself, tell your friends so that you can have those to hang on to during the hard times, because it's real hard. Sorry, you asked about practical. So let's build time and space.
Yeah.
And then routines and rhythms and rituals, right?
Yeah.
Come up with a high five or a handshake. If you're a parent, come up with a goodbye ritual. I mentioned my parents are missionaries. Every morning before we went to school, we stood in a circle, we held hands, and we said the Lord's Prayer. And that feels kind of formal and, it may not be in your comfort level. But for me as a kid, I didn't know that my parents were building in a rhythm and a ritual that made me feel like, oh, the day is starting. And that was from when I can remember, when I was 2 until the last day of my high school senior year. Whoever was in the home, I have older siblings that graduated and went to college, but whoever was in that home in the mornings, we stood in a circle, we held hands, and we said that prayer together. And so just find the ways to build in those rhythms and routines and build the time for it, because it takes time.
Yeah. Jackie?
I really appreciate Becca highlighting the fact that it's not either or, it's and, because you need both and, right?
Yeah.
They complement each other. And the fact that it is super, super hard work. And just want to remind us that this whole mindset of urgency comes from a noble place, right? We recognize that we have students who are, so far behind. The opportunity gap is a chasm. And so people are running, trying to fill up, trying to catch up, trying to help students succeed. And sometimes you run so fast and haste makes waste, right? Yeah. And so I really appreciate Becca pointing out that we need both and. It's not either or.
Yeah. Well, and I think, so it's important to mention the schools that we've worked in together were in areas that are definitely, you would look at them from the outside as resource depleted. Like there are not a lot of the same traditional resources available as there are in X, Y, or Z, top school district in that county or in that city, whatever. And so in Memphis specifically, part of the reason that Memphis is mentioned with a lot of emphasis in this conversation about academics is because the average ACT score in Memphis's lowest performing communities is between 14 and 16, but the average ACT score in the highest performing public schools in this same city are between 23 to 26. And then there's a massive portion of the kind of upper crust schools in this city that are private, and those students average above 28 on the ACT. Now, this is important to mention because what you have in Memphis is this wild disparity between haves and have-nots. And if you could look at a map, you would see a corridor where the school scores are really good. And then off of that road, the further you go, the school scores get really bad. And usually those numbers associate with income level and poverty level and all of that. So the reason that Memphis has been such a laboratory for academics in the last few years is that there's a large number of schools that are having a tough time getting their students where they need to be by state standards. And so there now have been a lot of academic reform efforts happening here. And so what we're really able to start seeing now is a little bit of data over the last 10, 12 years to say, here's what might be working, because some of the schools that are adopting these certain principles are beginning to achieve at a rate and a level that is not happening with some more traditional methods that are happening at other schools. And so, Jocelyn, one of the things that we're seeing now, and it's not just in Memphis, but it's in a lot of city centers across the country, are the creation of third party or not, third party outside kind of nonprofit groups that can say, hey, we know the school doesn't have the capacity to offer X, Y, or Z service because the funding's not there. We'll come in and we'll add that service in the schools. And so you've actually had the benefit of working in a school and now for one of the nonprofits. Will you talk about what that experience has been for you and kind of the benefits and the drawbacks that you've had in that role?
Yeah, sure. So definitely, similar to what everybody else has been saying, there is no perfect model for how to do this. I wish I could tell you, go research this one school. They're doing it great. There are some schools that are doing it better than some of us are, but they're not doing it great. And so I think that at least should give us some encouragement to know that there's a ways to go for everyone. There isn't somebody who's met it and that we're all just behind. We're all a little bit behind, and some of us a little bit more than others. Worked for a school for 3 years inside of a school, providing counseling services as a school social worker. And there are benefits, of course, of being on staff at a school because you're there all the time. You're able to meet the families. You're a part of the community. And I think that's a big piece for building that relationship, is being a part of the community. And I think we forget that. I think a lot of us drive there, do our job 9 to 5, right? Well, it's like 7 to 5. And then we drive home and we forget that we're still a part of this community because the majority of us who work in schools, we spend more time with these kids during those 180 days than they do with their parents, with their family, with their caregiver, with their siblings. So we are spending a significant amount of time there. So we are a part of their community. And so even more reason for us to be pushing into that relational capacity, right? Like knowing who they are, knowing their name, like knowing the things that they like, because we're with them all the time. So transition from there to now working for a nonprofit that partners with local charter schools and public schools to provide additional support, sometimes called wraparound services. That's also a kind of a big word that kind of floats around, where we're just constantly like throwing stuff at these families or these communities that don't have it. And I think, obviously, I'm grateful that we have this work that we're able to provide for these schools that don't have the ability to do that. But also for me, part of me wishes I didn't have that job, because that means that my job is taken by a person in the school, in the community, doing that 24/7, right? So that aside, I think what is beneficial with an outside partner coming in is that because you've created a partnership with the school, there is some mutual respect in understanding what that partnership will be. And so there is some understanding of, okay, I trust you. You seem to be the expert in this X, Y, and Z, right? The organization I work with focuses on attendance and mental health support, which is what I do. And so that's definitely a needed service. The school that I'm at didn't have kind of an in-house person to do that for years. And so now we get the chance to do that for families, which is awesome. But then there are things that are hard about that, right? Because then I am an outsider. So I don't know the teachers very well. I don't know the family very well. That's on me to know.
Oh no, we lost Jocelyn. Jocelyn.
Now build relationships with the families, with the kids. Sorry, you there?
Yeah, we got you now. Sorry, it froze for about 8 seconds, then cut back in. So we'll cut that part out. Yeah.
Okay. Well, you run into the problem where you end up having community partners that come in and provide a really good service, but they're not there every day, or the contract ends and then next year they're not there. And so for attachment's sake and for like trust's sake, that's not healthy and that's not helpful, especially for communities that are already needing to have these resources more readily and accessible to them. So, you know, my hope is that I also, alongside of like working every day, am also using my privilege and my power and my voice to advocate for that to be a part of what everyone experiences at school. Because even if you go on the private school end, not every private school has a counselor that functions in a counselor role. They have an academic advisor who will get you to college, but they don't have a person that you can talk to about what's going on at home. We just assume that, I guess, if you can pay, you don't have problems, right? And so sometimes that's a problem too. And we just have to understand that for a person to be seen as a whole person, they need all that support. They need a teacher, they need a counselor, they need some adult. And sometimes we don't think about that. We just assume that the people we have in the building are good enough. And, you know, we can always have more.
Right. I want to shift to parents for a second. And I think every educator, every person who works in a school has their list of things in the back pocket they wish that parents knew about how the school operated or what teachers need or the support that they need to have, how they can help the school, how they can advocate for themselves within the school. Jackie, I think like this is maybe the biggest wheelhouse you've got is in the area of parent advocacy and just that parent school relationship. And so, especially as a lot of schools around the country and a lot of families are trying to either make their last minute decisions right now about what to do for school, or are, you know, with great hesitancy, like strapping the mask on extra tight and, you know, getting their kids out the door. What would you know, what are some of the things that you would like to say on the precipice of a new school year? What are some things that parents need to know to better advocate and to better support their schools?
That's a good question. That's a big question.
Right.
And indeed, this is a terrifying time to be a parent and an educator.
Yeah.
And so really in my mind, the best advice I would give any parent really just ties in what Jocelyn is saying and what Becca is saying about relationship. Parents, build relationships with the people in your school, teachers, administrators. We all need to lead from a place of grace. The teachers are doing the very best they can do. And I'm really going to be transparent. On this side of the fence, the school building side of the fence, trying to navigate the technology that's required to do virtual learning and trying to make it quality for our students, it's overwhelming. So parents, I would say, remember that teacher is a human being, probably with the family, and to lead with grace. And don't be afraid to feel like you're an equal partner.
Yes.
And that's the thing that I wanted parents always to understand. You are an equal partner in the process of educating your children. You have a voice, utilize your voice. If you've got a concern, raise it. If you want to give a shout out to a teacher, don't be afraid to do that.
Yeah.
You are a very important partner in the entire process. Jocelyn talked about community partners. Becca talked about the importance of attachment. Parents, you get right in there and you be attached and you be a good partner. Because it's going to take all of us. This is an unprecedented time. None of us, as old as I am, I was not here for the pandemic flu, the Spanish flu. I'm old, but I'm not that old. So none of us have lived through the kind of stress, emotionally, physically, that we're enduring right now. And we need each other. If we're going to come out of this thing intact in any way, we really need to work together on behalf of our children. We need to work together. So parents, get in there.
Absolutely. So maybe maybe as we kind of wrap up here, one of the last things I'd love for us to talk about, and it's right down that lane, Jackie, for parents who are doing virtual learning or a hybrid of virtual learning and in-person stuff, or maybe are for the first time homeschooling, or good friends of ours, and everybody on this show knows them, but good friends of ours who had homeschooled, and they'd had this date circled for years as, hey, when they get to these grades, we're going to send them to in-person school. And now this year they're like, are you kidding? This is the year. This is their first school experience is this. For parents who are starting to tackle this right now, are there any practical pieces of advice you guys can offer from the school side of things to say, hey, watch out for this particularly with virtual learning or with at-home learning or pandemic learning, however you want to phrase it?
I love that word, pandemic learning.
So one of the things that I have thought about prior to this, but even more so now that we are virtual for the majority of the schools that are starting, the school that I'm at this year is virtual, is to recognize that kids learn differently, and virtual learning right now is pretty much auditory, right? Like you have to be able to just hear what's going on and maybe visual because you have to pay attention to a slide or something, but that is really only going to meet a certain percentage of kids. And adults, really honest, if we're being honest, right? The teachers that are having a hard lift are having a hard lift because they don't express themselves. They don't teach through a screen. They teach in person. Right. And they're good at that. So I think for parents especially, and teachers too, is to recognize that your child may be struggling not because they're not like excited about online learning, but because they literally cannot access it because it's in a module or a form that they can't get the most out of. So for a parent, I would try my best to see if there is alternative ways to get your child's learning to them. Like, are they sending out packets for people? Can you get one to supplement their learning? Some teachers are utilizing different forms to teach online. I know the school that I'm at is using Nearpod. It was new to me this year, but one of the cool things about it is you can do like a color or draw in for your answer. So for kids, especially little ones who can't type, because like what kindergartner is gonna type, right? But you can figure out with your finger or with a mouse pretty quickly how to draw something. And so I've even incorporated that into the sessions that I'll do online where I can give kids a chance to lifetime draw for me. And that's just another way to express, right? So that's part of it, is like trying to figure out what your child needs and see if you can advocate for it that way. But I would also say too, is like, we can get so caught up in the like, oh, we have to do this. And to some extent that's true. Like your child at some point has to learn something this year, but you can have fun and you can find out ways to say yes in that. So Jackie and I, we've talked about this with teachers when we were in the building about pushing teachers to figure out ways that they can creatively say yes. So yes, you have to do this, do now, right? But are they allowed to use a crayon today? And any color crayon? If they're going to get the work done, can you use a crayon? So with your kids too at home, like, yes, you have to be online right now, but can you sit on the couch? Can you sit in your bed? Can you sit outside for the hour, right? Giving them some flexibility to still have voice. And that's helping them know that like, oh, my parent or my caregiver cares about what is good for me, but also what I like. And when we are having fun, we learn better. I mean, we just do. And so then also trying to figure out like how we can say yes more and what that looks like. And there is no like, here's the worksheet that tells you how to say yes, because it's going to depend on each person, right? Your yes is different than my yes. But as a parent and as a teacher too, we have to do the work of building relationship to know what those yeses are.
That's so good. Yes. Becca, you're at a school that has been in session now for several weeks. Our kids are 1 week. Okay. Our kids are at a school that they're starting their third week tomorrow of school so far. Becca, I wonder if from week one, there were any observations you had where you think, oh man, parents, if you can kind of keep this mindset through the first week and maybe overemphasize these few things or over pay attention to these few things, what would those things be for you?
Yeah. So one thing that's unique about our school is that we are offering virtual and in person, so the parent can choose. And so my thoughts for our in-person students, we welcome them this week for the first time with a lot of new rules for safety and temperature checks and masks and social distancing. So one thing that we did before we welcomed kids was come up with a fun, our 3 W's. So our 3 W's are we can keep each other safe by wearing a mask, washing our hands, and watching our distance. So even something simple like that, like coming up with something to help your kiddo get prepared for it, can be really helpful. Wearing a mask is really, really challenging. So if at any time in the future you're gonna send your kid to in-person school, go ahead and try it at home, try it on a drive, do it with them. I dislike wearing a mask a lot, especially whenever it's Memphis humidity and I'm doing the car line. Right. I do not like it at all. But they do get used to it and they can learn to tolerate it.
Yeah.
But it's something that takes practice. So I would encourage just practicing it, making it silly, play peekaboo with it. If you have little ones, just make it fun, be playful with it. Play a guessing game about what does my face look like right now? Am I happy or sad, or am I mad? And help them learn how to look at the eyes, because that's new for all of us.
Yeah.
Teach them to speak up, because when you got little baby kindergartners and pre-K coming in and they're trying to tell you their name through the mask and you have no idea what they're saying, that can be really tricky. So just the mask is a big part of it, and social distancing is another. So kids need humans need physical touch and affection. Yeah. And right now we are all deprived of that. We can't even hug, our best friends or our neighbors. And so you are going to need to overdo the physical affection in a way that you've never had to do before, because you're going to send your kid to school, and this goes for virtual and in person. Your kids are not experiencing high fives and hugs and, just being real close dance parties where they're dancing with their friends. They're just not. And so you're going to need to overdo it with the physical affection. That's what I would say about for the in-person folks, a couple thoughts, and just be excited about it. If you're scared all the time, if you're scared of your kid going to school and they feel that, they're going to pick up on it and they're going to be scared. If you're constantly going, don't take the mask off, they're also going to be scared. But if you're like, oh, it slipped, here's how we fix it. If you just do that, that's what we're doing at school. We're not scaring anybody. We're just helping them learn. It's a learning process.
Yeah.
These are new social norms for all of us to learn. For the virtual ones, I would say routine. Whatever you can do to build a routine that works for your kid and make it visual for them. Put it up on a whiteboard, put it up on sticky notes on the wall, anything visual to help them know what's coming. And just know that paying attention on a screen is this is not scientific, but it's probably 50 times as hard.
Yes.
So
yeah, definitely.
That's whether you're an adult or a kid. So just be ready for them to struggle paying attention, as your schedule allows, or whoever can be with them. Try to listen for what the teacher's saying in case they miss something. You have a life and a job and other things too as a parent, but as much as you can, especially in the beginning, really be close by and helping them learn what it looks like, and helping them when they accidentally magnify their screen and they can't read anything anymore. That's going to be really important. So Jocelyn said this, but it's so true. You have to make it fun. And right now, y'all, none of us are having fun. This isn't fun for any of us. This is hard and it's scary. But for the kids, so my advice to our teachers was, we all feel anxious. Let's hold on to each other. Let's talk about that. Let's encourage each other. Let's support each other. And then when the kids come, let's be calm for the kids. And so don't dismiss your feelings, but process those with your safe adults so that you can be a safe adult for your kids. So that would be my two things. I feel like Miss Jackie's waiting to jump in.
Sure. I'm just enjoying the wisdom of Jocelyn Lee and Becca Tarleton. It's so delightful for me to just see you young women flourish in your calling. Because, I know when you kind of were young in this journey, and now you're just so gifted and professional and learned. And I just really, I delight in that. I truly do. And I just feel so blessed to have been able to kind of walk along, your professional journey and see how influential you are out in the field. JD, I don't know if either one of them said this, but they both teach college students at the graduate level. Did either of you mention that?
Of course they did not.
No,
of course
they did not. But they are both adjunct professors. Huh? Snap it up. Snap it up. So I am super, super proud of these young women, these powerful, brilliant young women. And my advice to parents, it's, you've heard it before. When you're flying and the plane is crashing, you're supposed to put your mask on first, right? Before you try to help others. Yep. And so I would remind parents of that, to find something that you can do to carve out a few minutes. For me, when my kids were little, I'd go hide in the bathroom. This is a true story. Go hide in the bathroom and read a few minutes of a book. Books gave me life. But parents, find that thing for you that you can do. If it's a cup of coffee, if it's sitting in the backyard, if it's eating a bucket of ice cream, whatever you need to do, try to build that in. So that you can be your best self for the people around you, because there's a lot of weight on your shoulders right now, and we need you to be healthy also, parents.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. I mean, for our first 2 weeks of school, full 2 weeks, Becca, you touched on these things. I can't underscore the importance of some type of board nearby that has instructions for how to log in to your device if you're doing that online, a schedule printed out. And we've got 3 kids that are in school, one who's in Mother's Day out age. And so the school kids each have their own bin, and they've got their schedule, their folder, their headphones, and anything else they might need for their specific tasks in those bins. And then they've got a little card in those bins that's all their specific logins and their email address and that stuff. The other thing is the routine piece. We tried to make a habit of celebrating the little wins that are part of this new routine. And so the other morning, our 9-year-old was sitting at the table and they said, "It is awesome that 5 minutes before school, I'm just now starting to eat my waffles." And it was like, yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah. And she was still early for class, So I think that is imperative, is remembering the small wins in this, and creating the constant language of the temporariness of this setup, right? This is tough. What's the first thing you're gonna do once we're out of this time? Or what's the thing you're most excited about when school goes back to normal? Or what's the thing that the first place you want to go and hang out or eat or place you want to go once we can do these things again, and keeping that in mind. And so, I think all these things are really helpful. Ladies, thank you all so much for joining us today and sharing all these different things. And I think we're going to have each of you on again in the future to help unpack more in the world of education. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us on.
Man, what a fun conversation with Jocelyn, Becca, and Jackie. They're obviously good friends of mine and former coworkers of mine. But as you heard in the show, they are deep wells of knowledge and wisdom, and they are incredible people. The work they're doing is truly inspiring. And so hope that you enjoyed that episode today. And hopefully if you are an educator, if you're a teacher, administrator, come and listen today. Maybe a friend sent this to you, and we're glad that you listened. And hopefully there's some practical, great tools that you can take with you and implement right away in the classroom or in the front office there. If you're a parent, I hope that you got some information on how you can advocate. Also, just on what schools go through on the administrative kind of staff side, and how they can better be set up. Maybe you're a parent who can start an initiative at a school, looking for an attachment zone or something of that sort. And so obviously we know that parents are the best advocates for their kids, and we want them to be empowered to do so. And so whatever your takeaway was from today, I hope that you left with some practical tools ready to take on this school year, whether it's in person or online. So for Jackie, for Jocelyn, for Becca, and for Mo and Tana, I'm JD Wilson. Our audio each week is mixed, mastered, edited, a painful amount of edits usually by the one and only Kyle Wright. And our music came to us via Tad Jewett. He wrote it, he recorded it, he played every instrument for it, and we're grateful to him for it. So for all of them, we hope that you have a great week, a great start to your school year, if that's what's happening for you this week. We will talk to you next week on the Empowered to Connect podcast. See you later.